The king of pop, Michael Jackson's legacy may be forever affected by a documentary that just came out on HBO this Sunday. After first premiering at the Sundance Film Festival in 2019 amid much controversy, Linda and I both watched the first part of this documentary. We have plenty of thoughts, so guys, stay tuned.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to TV Pilot Reviews here on AfterBuzz TV. If this is your first time tuning in, this is a show where Linda Antwi and I, my wonderful and esteemed co-host,
hi guys,
review pilots for you guys. And normally we're talking about television shows specifically. We looked at the schedule this week and we weren't necessarily super excited about any of the new shows that were airing, and we felt that as TV journalists, one of the most responsible and honestly buzzworthy topics we could and should be addressing was the new MJ documentary that came out on HBO this week called Leaving Neverland. So Linda, we made the call. We're not doing a pilot this week. We're doing part one of a documentary.
correct.
And if this is your first time tuning in, as I mentioned, I think I just said it, but we normally review pilots. We're just going to cover this doc today. We've both only seen part one.
Yes.
But we still have plenty of thoughts, and we'd be curious to hear your thoughts too. So Linda, let's go ahead and start with just that. What did you... I guess I should real quick give you guys a bit of a...
let's do that.
And just jump in if I'm missing anything. But basically, as I mentioned at the top, this is a very lightning rod, controversy-generating documentary that came out about a month ago at Sundance. Essentially, it's really just the personal accounts of two alleged victims of Michael Jackson's childhood sexual abusive tendencies, really kind of timeline 1987-ish to 1992-ish. The two subjects who are being focused on are Jimmy Safechuck and Wade Robson, who both claim that they were pretty brutally sexually abused by MJ during those years. Wade was about 7 years old, Jimmy was about 10 years old, and we go through about 3 years of their sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Am I missing anything?
Nailed it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Family accounts as well to contribute to the narrative.
And interestingly enough, moms only.
You're right.
Unless in part two the dads get involved, but moms only. I thought that part was interesting as well.
Again, we've only seen part one because in the spirit of the show, we only review the first component of a project, and we will give you our pass or play on whether or not we plan on watching part two. So, Linda, I want to hear your overall thoughts on this doc, and I want to hear whether or not you're going to watch the second part.
My overall thoughts, I'm just so torn. I'm torn by this documentary, and I'll tell you first why I'm torn. I'm torn because I feel like, on the one hand, if you're a survivor or a victim or either or, you should have the opportunity to tell your story. On the other hand, I feel like why now? And not allowing the accuser an opportunity to tell their side.
Yeah.
And then also in a documentary form, and I know that this is from, like we said, the victim standpoint, in a documentary form, I would have liked for it to be the full picture. So these two are saying this from this timeline. This is what happened in this timeline. Maybe the family's saying this. Friends are saying this. Dad's saying this. But it really, in my opinion, was a one-sided documentary, and I get what they were doing, and they did the documentary well in that sense. But for an overall picture and then to come to a conclusion, which is what people are going to do from this, I'm not sure if I'm on board.
You feel like it might have been a little journalistically irresponsible.
Yeah, if it's a documentary.
Yeah, to be sort of framed as a documentary, but really only...
It's these two, it's their story.
Right.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, like, it is at its most basic, the accounts of two alleged victims of Michael Jackson's abuse. I will say, though, it's very hard for me to not believe them. And I think because of especially the last 5 years, I've become much more accustomed and trained to believe victims. And I found that their accounts were so brutally and notoriously specific that in the way it's presented to me, there just feels to be so much credibility around the stories that are being told for me. So I don't know. I mean, I found it to be very moving. And if I will say, as a examination of the effects around how fame can influence and create dangerous power structures, I think it's a pretty valuable document for me.
I wrote down this as a note. I feel like it should have been called The Pursuit of Fame at All Costs.
Yeah. Oh, for the victims, you're saying.
Yeah, I think this documentary should have been called, and I'm naming it, The Pursuit of Fame at All Costs.
Because in your mind, even right now, these victims are just looking for fame.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I believe that, again, victims and survivors are real because it's something that happens more than we think. But I also think, too, when you throw in someone who's in a position of power or someone who is famous, it skews the relationship even more so that if I'm a journalist, if I'm an actress, and I'm young, I'm a child, and I'm looking to live my dream, and then this super famous person says, you're special, and you're this, and you're that, you're still developing. You don't know. So my point is, you're between the children and the parents, and if you look at even part one of the documentary, one of the moms, the Australian mom, and I think that's
Mrs. Robson.
Robson, at all costs, in my opinion.
Yeah.
At all costs, let's do this. And you can think that you're doing the right thing because you're helping your child pursue their passion, but at the same time, she started to call herself towards the end of the documentary a stage mom.
Right.
Was that your dream? Do you see what I'm saying? So
Definitely.
Pursuit at all costs. And I'm not saying whether I think that they're telling the truth or not, because I don't know. I know that for sure that this is their story and this is what they believe happened. And if it happened, then this is a sad story.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to watch the second part?
I am not going to watch the second part. I was going... if I get curious enough, I will. But I feel like I have the gist of their story, and it was enough for me.
Yeah, you don't know if there's anything more to be illuminated based on. Interesting. We have some people in the chat. Real quick, I'm going to shout you guys out. We have Dylan Matthews, who says, you should watch the interview from 60 Minutes Australia, who interviewed MJ's former maid. She believes he's guilty. And then we have Music Fan 1112 saying the maid was sued by MJ in the 90s and he won. It's been interesting to see the huge fallout from his fandom based on this documentary. And we can discuss that, I think, probably later in the show.
Okay.
But there's a huge community of people who are really having trouble buying into the validity of these stories.
And there's a backstory. And I encourage people to, do your own research as well. And make sure that you have a full picture. And again, not discrediting this story because this is their story and this is, allegedly what happened to them. But there's so much more. And when it comes to Hollywood, there's always so much more.
Right. I am going to watch the second part. I was very compelled by this documentary. I hear you that it's not necessarily the fullest picture of the alleged, the whole entire cloud surrounding Michael Jackson's alleged accusations around what happened, but I didn't feel like that was what the documentary was. Like, in some ways, you could almost argue the documentary is not really about Michael Jackson because it's about these stories.
I don't agree with that at all, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, like what I appreciated about the documentary was I don't feel like it was at all the mission of the documentary to even necessarily disparage his reputation. Of course, that's going to happen, but the boys never said anything like, I want to make sure that his legacy is tarnished. I found that it was a pretty objective presentation of what was believed to have happened. So never at any moment did I feel like the boys, I guess the men at this point, wanted us to... I don't feel like I was being told to receive anything besides hearing the stories of these victims, which I think is important. And like you said, I like that people have the space to tell their stories.
Yeah.
And
I agree with that part.
I expected there to be more this monstrous behavior type of journalism, or I can't believe the predatory nature of these acts. But we didn't get that. We got a recounting of what happened, which I found to be surprising based on the reactions I was hearing.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily thought that it was going to be predatory. I mean, it is predatory if the story is true. What I thought it was done in a way where, as a child, you could understand the flow of the story. And I thought that was an interesting way to tell this story. I just had some problems with some of the wording. I just had some problems with how one-sided it is. And if I look at it as their story, then it's not one-sided to me. If I look at it like these two have a story to tell, and I think that all victims should have a platform where they can tell their story. I don't know. It's just something is not sitting well with me, and I'm not sure what it is. And
That's
I'm not
fair.
saying that I don't believe them.
Right.
So I want to be clear about that. I found, and it's splitting their fans. So I pulled two separate things that I wanted to share. So one is coming from Joannis I Am Kin on Instagram, and it was reshared by one of our hosts here at AfterBuzz. And it says, I have a policy to believe survivors. Rarely one claiming to be a survivor proves themselves completely non-credible. Wade Robson has been one of those people. I don't know the truth about MJ and may never, but I don't believe a word that comes out of Wade Robson's mouth. And then on the flip side, there was another one that says, so many in media, including Oprah, are blindly taking hashtag leaving Neverland at face value, shaping a narrative uninterested in facts, proof, credibility, is what Jermaine, Michael Jackson's brother, tweeted. And he goes on to say that they faced same claims in 2005. Jury saw right through it, trial by law, blah, 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 blah. So you're going to have two facets, I think, on this. You're going to have, did you get a sneak peek at all with the Oprah after interview?
No, but I've been reading some coverage.
Okay, so I watched about 10 minutes of it. And I like her take on it. And her take is, it really isn't, in her opinion, about Michael Jackson. She said that she's done over 200 interviews in her 25 years of being on air about sexual abuse, about sexual predators, and those that prey on children. And oftentimes, it's not just about the abuse. It's about the the wooing process. And what she took from this documentary was, let's bring light in today's day and age of what actually is happening, how often it happens,
Right.
in churches, in schools, at home, all of those things. So if this documentary is going to do what she says she couldn't do in 217 episodes, then that's what's important to take away from this.
I completely agree with that, and that's another reason. Again, I've sort of touched on it, but I think when I went into this documentary, I expected it to be this scathing criticism of Michael Jackson's predatory behavior. But what I found it to be much more was, how are people lulled into sexual and abusive relationships? And I found it was fascinating to listen to families discuss how an influential and powerful and famous person can practically bend the rules and blur the lines to create systems to promote horrible behavior.
What did you take away from Wade's mom? So Wade's mom, son's dancing, and then they go to the concert a few years later, and then Michael Jackson said, "Oh, I wish I knew you were here. You could have come on stage." She's like, "Oh, we can be here tomorrow." Right? So she gets tickets.
Yeah.
And then they go to dance to Disney from Australia. They get there, and she's phoning around to find Michael Jackson. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like,
Is it her fault?
is there not a fault there, because it's definitely not her fault, but was there a lack of awareness?
Yes. And like, that was what I found so interesting was, I think, but I understand. Like, I think more than any other industry, people want to revere artists. A politician, despite being powerful, could never get away with any of this. Powerful people, even the president, wouldn't be able to create this kind of behavior, but we put artists and people that we love on such a pedestal that we create systems for them to get away with anything.
Yeah, and in that time frame in the 90s, Michael Jackson was it.
He was it.
And again, to quote Oprah, he was like a god at that time. Like, there's no other superstar that is going to be a superstar like he was in those times. And to put that in perspective, and one of the moms said, we were like just no one. We were a middle class family, right? If you think of it that way, then I can see how you can get wrapped up in the glamour and the glitz and the lifestyle and going to Neverland
Right.
and traveling in limos and private planes and staying at hotels. All of that, you get swept up in that. But I'm trying to think of the other documentary that's on Netflix where the girl was abducted.
Oh, Abducted in Plain Sight.
Yeah. So similar idea where the parents get like scooped up in this weird situation with the adult, and then the kids are all sucked into. I just thought it's interesting, and I guess that's the question. Like, I'm not a parent, so I'm not sure, but I wrote some questions and I would love to hear back from you guys. So my first question is, who would ever leave a child alone with an adult they didn't know? And I'm speaking of the kid that came and met Michael and then they left him for a week. Jimmy. Who would do that? Like, just in general. I don't know you, but you're famous. You're Michael Jackson. Nothing can happen. But again, he's still a man and he's an adult and you don't know him. And then how did they continue on their trip for like a week and not check in? And then as soon as you're like, because she said, oh, well, we tried to reach out and we couldn't reach him. As a parent, again, I would think that you would start to panic. And then the flip side is like the abusers. And how do you not notice that you're not only grooming the children? If your kid all of a sudden in the beginning you were like, well, no, you can't sleep with Michael Jackson, to all of a sudden your suite in the hotel is on a different floor and so far away. Like, do those not ring bells? Or am I talking from a perspective like I've never been in this situation, so I don't know? What do you think?
I was thinking about this a lot while watching it, and that's what I think the documentary did a pretty convincing job of, is sort of showing you how you get from A to Z. And I think, like you mentioned, there's never been anyone to accrue the amount of reverence and obsession and fame and truly like deification that Michael Jackson has. And the only kind of equivalent I could think of was like a Lady Gaga or something today. And I bet there are parents who have come to trust and regard Lady Gaga as such a moral and cultural compass for them that you're able to lie to yourself and say, this isn't weird. She's Lady Gaga. She won an Oscar. She has all these charities. She would never, ever do anything like this. And I think for some reason, with famous artists, more than, again, politicians, bankers, whoever, influential people, we will do anything we can to revere them because they're touching us. Ooh, wording.
Yeah.
They're reaching us in a place that no one else can. They're gratifying our artistic and cultural souls. So I think it seems crazy that a parent would do that, but what I really liked about the documentary was it got me there. And it got me to not necessarily approve of these parents' behaviors, but understand how they got there. Personally, for me, that the documentary was able to do that.
So for me, I could see that with Jimmy's mom, because she was like, well, he'd come to the house and he was like my son. I would do his laundry.
Yeah.
So I can see that aspect of it. But with Wade's mom, I don't know. I almost feel like she was living her dream in this as well, and loving the lifestyle and wanting to figure out how she can have more of that lifestyle and actively pursuing Michael Jackson because that was her in. Yeah.
I could see that. I don't know. But the hope, again, is that whatever the results for Michael Jackson's legacy are, the hope is that the practical takeaways here are check the way that you revere famous people. Don't allow someone who has a cultural gravity or influence over art to not play by the rules just because of who they are.
Yep.
And that's been like the important narrative that I think everyone is learning in this business is we don't get a pass. Time's up. You know, you can't just bend the rules for someone because they're famous and influential, especially in Hollywood.
If that's a takeaway from this, then absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that just as people and as a society, we have to do better and not just, blindly follow because it's the rich and famous.
Yeah.
But I do want to say this, because I did read an article and I'm still thinking about it because it's on my mind. It's interesting to me the type of coverage and documentaries that have been out there. So we're talking about Michael Jackson. Right now in the news, R. Kelly is a big draw in the news. But we also have had people like Woody Allen, even with Elvis. There have been rumors and talks, and we don't see documentaries on that. And I think that, again, in today's day and age, and especially here in America, that race does play a part. Like, if you're a bad person and you're a predator, I don't care what you look like and what race you are. If we're going to call people out, we should call them equally out across the board, because I think that that's something that's important to pay attention to, like the Weinsteins and all of that. Like, let's do their story. Let's hear about their story, so that we can, again, like you said, draw attention to not blindly following stardom and thinking that you know the person when really you don't know anything about them.
Interesting.
Yep.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think a potential counter argument is just that, like, the reason Michael Jackson is a compelling study is because there's truly never been anyone like him. But I guess Elvis is, when you think about that.
Yep.
I don't know. Do you feel like because he's passed away, it's disrespectful?
I don't think it's disrespectful, but I do feel like he doesn't have an opportunity to, his family does, to speak on his own behalf. And, some of the notes that I wrote down, like, so I didn't know that Wade actually testified in his 2005 trial and said that he wasn't abused and all of that. And then he didn't know what abuse was. And I believe that. I believe that he thought that he was in love with Michael Jackson. And so therefore he wasn't being abused. I believe that, that he believed that. So the question then becomes, at what age did you realize that you were abused, and what changed for you in that? And then as I dug deeper in, because, I like to research, like, what is going on? Because the time frame and all of it was a little dodgy to me. I wasn't really straightforward on it. He's worked with Michael. He's applied for jobs years later with his foundations and was not hired and all this stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to the story. And again, I'm not saying that what they're saying is not true, but there's just so much more. And so when I go back to that quote or title I was telling you, The Pursuit of Fame, it's like, I'm glad that he was able to come to terms with it himself. And I hope that he's also dealing with healing, and maybe this documentary was a part of his healing process. But at the very least, it's bringing attention to sexual predators. They're out there, and let's have that conversation and what we can do to protect not only our children, but ourselves.
Yeah. Were you an MJ fan? Are you an MJ fan?
I cannot say that I was not. I was absolutely an MJ fan. And am I an MJ fan now? I don't know. I feel undecided right now. That's how I feel.
I love Michael Jackson. I love his music. And I don't know. I mean, I will say I wasn't terribly surprised by anything I heard in this. And maybe it's because of my age. It's interesting. I feel like by the time I was able to, adopt a cultural consciousness and be able to perceive, the culture around me, not necessarily the people around me, but actively engage in a world where I'm understanding television and media. And 'cause that's different, right? It's a different kind of consciousness when you're a kid. I always had a suspicion around Michael Jackson. And
really?
Yeah. And I feel like it's because I never got to see, it's no secret that his personality, and you could argue mental health, declined in the 90s.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is I never got to see this stable, heroic, musical icon version of Michael Jackson that so many people who love him know.
Yeah.
I only saw the sort of unstable. Yeah. So I just feel like the only Michael Jackson I ever received felt kind of analogous to the one I saw in this documentary.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And I think a lot of the people who are really, really wanting so badly to not believe anything they're hearing are the ones who grew up and saw the stable, heroic, Grammy-winning hero.
Yeah, I think that, but I also think, too, that he's internationally known, and I think he was internationally and still is internationally loved by many. And that goes across age, race, everything. Goes across everything. So there are kids now who hear Michael Jackson's music and it's timeless.
Yeah.
You know, and so I don't know. I don't know where this is going to sit with me. I think I have to sit with it still a little bit.
Right.
And figure it out. I don't know.
Well, I would love to hear what you guys think, because we're not the only people who are dealing with this huge cultural moment, which was the release of this documentary and the integrity of arguably the most important figure in the history of pop music. So I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Let us know your thoughts. Some of you guys are in the chat right now. We've had Don Dorian with some comments. He says that in the first 10 minutes, it sounded like a fame-hungry guy, and the other guy was like an ex, which is interesting. So,
and that's another thing, right? Talking about just getting into the nitty-gritty of the documentary. Some of the wording, I don't know, like it's confusing to me, okay, because I don't know, so I can't speak on it, but I would think that, and you guys are free to correct me and educate me, but talking about him as if he was your mate, your boyfriend, your partner, significant other, and like getting married and saving the rings and feeling jealous when you saw other people taking your place. It's, I don't know, like you're an adult now, so I would think that some of the wording would be, I know now that was wrong, and I understand that he was not my partner, but that wasn't clarified unless it's clarified in part 2 that I have not seen. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. I think that I had the hardest time with Wade. I think that James' story made sense to me, and how it played out. I don't know, again, whether they're true or not. I don't know.
well, we'll have to see. And if you guys have seen part 2, and I have heard part 2 tries to unpack a lot of the questions we have.
So then maybe I have to watch it.
Well, I think it might be illuminating. I think a lot of the in 2005, why did you defend him? Why are you not now? And I think from what I've heard, that's a lot of what Oprah is touching on. But I guess you could make the argument of just purely from a storytelling standpoint, if you have those questions but didn't feel compelled to watch part 2, are the documentarians really doing their job? You know, like at the end of the day, is this a well-made documentary?
I'm already hearing rumors that he's trying to have a second part, like a third and fourth part to this documentary.
Interesting.
Yeah. I also read an article, and I think that you guys might think this is interesting as well. There was an interview done with him in 2003 by a British journalist called Martin Bashir. And months after that, the police launched a criminal investigation because there was that 13-year-old in this interview. And the time frame matches up with the time frame of this documentary. So if you guys want to look it up, apparently it's somewhere online. And it would be interesting to put it in the perspective of what's gone on from the late 80s all the way up until this trial of 2005 where he's found not guilty. And the other thing I thought was interesting, I have so many notes. Wade mentioned Macaulay Culkin and how they both testified in the trial, and Macaulay says that he's never been abused by Michael Jackson, and then Wade now has been. And I thought it was interesting that he brought him up as in, yeah, I knew him, and yeah, we were friends, but he was also like almost like his rival. Did you catch that in the first part?
I don't know if I totally caught that, but that's really interesting. It does kind of complicate.
It complicates a lot of it, I think. Again, you know, as a victim, I'm sure there's no right way to tell your story, but there's just so many layers to this.
All of this.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to be responsible and say something, and I know that we're not done, but I want to throw this out there because it's such a heavy topic. Guys, if you are a victim, a survivor, are dealing with this very touchy subject, I found an organization online called RAINN, RAINN.org, and they have a 1-800 line that reaches out to wherever you are. It pulls up your phone number, area code, and it will give you place to go to or call that's in your area. And their number is 800-656-HOPE. So it's 800-656-4673. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Linda. Yeah, hotlines, guys, they are game changers. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Linda. And it's never too late to make a phone call, guys.
Yeah.
It's been interesting. We've been touching on it, but people are really unhappy about this documentary. I've been fascinated to see any coverage. You know, the HBO trailer for this, for example, on their YouTube channel has like a 10% like to 90% dislike ratio. So critics, I think it's got a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. They're hailing it as deeply investigative journalism, responsibly told, and viewers and the community, especially his fandom, are not at all on the same page.
Ah, interesting. So the media is saying, good job, and everyone else is like, no.
Right.
Interesting.
And it's maybe that thing where it's like MJ is one of the few cultural institutions that people just don't want to dethrone.
But that is not okay if it's true.
Right.
And so again, that's why I am where I am. If it's true, it's not okay, because that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying it's not okay to have rules that are different for someone who is famous than for anybody else. I think that my problem with this is the timing of it. And I also think, too, if you're accused of something, you should also be able to defend yourself. And there's ample opportunity for these two to come forward earlier. And I get that you came forward because you have children now and all of that, but wrong is wrong. And then when did you tell your parents? And like, where are you guys' parents? Like, I don't even understand still, too. To be honest, watching the mom and saying how she spent a lot of time looking for her son, couldn't find him, but became best friends with the chimp, and then she laughs. I was like, what? Are you crazy? You're making light of this situation. Your son is saying to the world that he's a sexual abuse survivor, and you're making light of it. Shame on you. That's how I feel.
Yeah. I just think, as a counterpoint to what you brought up, like, we can't know when survivors are ready to tell their story.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. And again, like I said, I don't know, but
Right.
The timing is hard for me right now, just because you can't have a second side.
Right. Yeah. Well, let us know your thoughts. If you are like a majority of people out there, you had issues with this documentary. So if so, guys, it's a democracy and this is YouTube. So let us know down below what you think. If you really thought it was well told and responsible and important, let us know that too. The truth is, however you feel about it, this is a conversation-generating moment in our culture. So we'd love to hear what you think.
And that's what's important.
Yeah.
Because I think that this is a topic that for far too long people have been ashamed to talk about. And so let's talk about it.
Absolutely. And if you want to talk to us on Twitter, you can do that as well. Guys, I'm on Twitter at Jeffrey C. Graham.
And I am across social media as Linda is so girly.
Any final thoughts on the doc before we make our way out, Linda?
I think that just talking with you and talking with you guys, I will check out part 2 just to see if my questions get answered.
Absolutely, and we hope you guys do the same. For now, thanks for tuning in, and we will be back with a pilot next week, guys. We appreciate you letting us take a little detour with our format, but we'll be back with more television pilots coming up soon. That's Wednesdays at 5 p.m., and thanks for tuning in.
Our founder, Keven Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.